I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
The great Chinese strategist and thinker once wrote that war should not be begun unless the end is in sight. Sadly, that admonition of Sun Tzu was not adhered to in this war in Iraq. Let me bring us back to what we're all about today. We've been hearing discussions ranging from both ends of the football field. This is a very simple, straightforward resolution. The first part of it is we fully support the American troops. And I must say, Madam Speaker, we're so proud of them. They're volunteers, they're professionals, they understand the word duty. And secondly, we do not agree with the troop increase of 21,500 for the simple reason it hasn't worked in the past, for the simple reason it's going to cause somewhere between 2,500 and 13,000 support troops to support that effort. And consequently, it is not a well thought out tactic, and despite the fact that some wish to call it a strategy, it is a tactic, and there's a large difference between the two. This time I yield to the gentlelady who's a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee as well as the Budget Committee, the gentlelady from California, Ms. Camps.
The gentlelady is recognized. The gentleman from Missouri will stay how many minutes?
Yes, for 5 minutes.
For 5 minutes. The gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank my colleague for yielding. Madam Speaker, I rise in strong support of this resolution supporting our troops and disapproving the President's plan to escalate the war in Iraq. More than 4 years ago, the resolution to support a war in Iraq came before this House. After careful consideration of the evidence and arguments put forth for a unilateral, preemptive attack on Iraq, I decided I could not in good conscience vote for that resolution. My no vote against the President's plan for war in Iraq is one of my proudest moments in Congress. I didn't believe the case for a war had been made. There was no real evidence of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. The administration's arguments about al-Qaeda connections with Iraq were specious, and its attempt to link Iraq with the tragedy of 9/11 was shameful. I was deeply concerned about the effects of preemptive war on America's standing in the world, and equally worried about the ramifications for the greater Middle East, a region of great importance and even greater fragility. And I had strong concerns about the administration's preparation for the aftermath of a war in Iraq. The administration was completely focused on waging war and not on winning the peace. Unfortunately, Madam Speaker, all of those concerns have been borne out. There was no WMD, no al-Qaeda connections, no 9/11 link. It was all trumped up evidence by an administration consumed with toppling the dictator in Iraq. Today, Iraq is in civil war. The Middle East is even more unsettled, and our standing in the world is at a low point. The international support given to America after 9/11 was squandered and will take years to repair the damage. And as a nation, we are even less secure today than we were the day we invaded Iraq. I point this out only because it is critically important to know where we have been if we want to know where we should be going. This resolution gives voice to the deep opposition here in the Congress and throughout the country to the President's plan for escalating the war in Iraq. I speak for the vast majority of my constituents on the Central Coast of California when I state my unequivocal opposition to this escalation. The administration's plan looks like more of the same failed policies that got us here in the first place. It is a plan based more on hope than on fact, buttressed by hysterical rhetoric. It is a plan opposed by numerous military leaders and experts. It is, quite frankly, simply not believable. The recent national intelligence estimate makes it perfectly clear that the president's grand plan is just never going to work. The resolution here before us puts Congress on record against the proposition that success will come only after more troops are thrown into battle. The other objective of this resolution is to remind everyone that opposing the war in Iraq, and especially opposing the president's escalation, is consistent with supporting our troops. Our men and women in uniform have done everything we have asked them to do, and so much more. Over 3,000 have made the ultimate sacrifice. More than 20,000 others have been injured, so very many of them seriously. Let no one doubt the bravery of our troops and the support that I and my colleagues who are opposed to this war have for them. I'm eternally grateful for the sacrifices our men and women in uniform and their families are willing to make every single day. They continue the long, distinguished line of soldiers, sailors, and airmen that have kept our country and so many others free from tyranny and oppression. But their service is due more than just heartfelt appreciation and flowery words from politicians. Their sacrifice, their service is owed responsible leadership from those civilian leaders with whom power ultimately rests. And that is where our soldiers have been let down. This administration has taken arrogance, stubbornness, and incompetence to new heights. It ignored the advice of military experts leading up to and throughout this war. It stocked reconstruction teams with political hacks, and it brushed off the indisputable reality of Iraq in a meltdown. It dismissed the considered opinion of the Iraqi study group, the Congress, most importantly, the American people. Make no mistake, the failure of the war in Iraq lies at the highest levels of the White House and at the desks of the Pentagon civilian leadership. And the cost of that failure is borne by our troops, their families, and the Iraqi people. It is time for the administration to stop obfuscating the conditions on the ground in Iraq, stop the charade about so-called new plans that will finally bring success in Iraq. Madam Speaker, it's time to stop the war in Iraq. Support the troops, indeed. Bring them home.